So we're working on the Lincoln. And I'll catch y'all up on what we're doing. So, yeah, I actually kind of recorded this and realized I was yapping along for like 10 minutes straight and just talking. And so I figured I would at least yap and work. And get y'all caught up on what we're doing. So, on that road trip, we had a lot of blow-by. Thing runs good, but it does have blow-by. And I think the rings just are not sealing well anymore. There's not wear in the cylinders. I think it's the rings themselves. But anyway, and it's got a major rear main oil leak. And so we need to address those two items. And can I get this thing off? Nope. So my thought was, the other issue it has, it's got a really bad transmission leak between the transmission and the engine. But it only leaks when it's been sitting a couple days. So like on that road trip, we didn't have any issues with the transmission leaking. I mean, it may be minor leaks, but nothing major. We didn't ever have to add any fluid, but as soon as I brought it back home and let it sit a couple days, it puked several quarts out. And what's happening is, the converter's draining back, which they do that. I mean, that's not a big deal. There is a check valve on the pump, and it's probably sticking or seeping past. But they actually did away with the check valve in later years because they can stick closed. So the check valve's really not the issue. The issue is, well, the pump, I guess, has got some wear, but that's really not an issue either. The issue is, a seal, which I think it's the O-ring seal on the pump itself, is just not holding. And that's what we need to concern ourselves with, is fixing that. I don't think I can get this without getting the fan shroud. Let's see, what if we take the pulley off? Maybe. The other thing is this thing's chewing up belts, so we need to look at these pulleys. See if we can maybe clean them up some more. They've got a little bit of pitting on them, but they're really not that bad. Maybe try to find another set. It's in a little better shape. I don't know. So, yeah. So this thing's got blow-by. It's leaking oil like crazy. The transmission's leaking. All that amounted to was, it'd probably be easiest to fix all that by pulling the engine. I really didn't want to take this thing out of commission, so I started working on seeing if I could find a cheap engine, which I did. And I didn't want to just put something in it, so whatever I bought, I was looking for a cheap rebuilder, not a running engine, because it may not be better than what I have. So if I'm going to do something, I'm going to go rebuilt. Now, like I said, I wasn't planning on boring or anything like that, just rings and bearings, stuff like that. Just hone it and go. So started looking, and I found a pullout from a 84 F250 or F350. It'd been sitting for a while, covered in plastic outside, but it was running. They pulled it out to put a 460 or a 5.9 Cummins in it, and pull this up because I want to focus on this real quick, and then I'll continue my story. Shoot. Come. There. Trying to preserve my radiator. Definitely don't want to nick that. Anyway, so it's a running pull out, so I figured, it should be a good rebuilder. And should be a good rebuilder. And I took a socket and a breaker bar with me, and just to make sure, put it on the crank pulley, spun it over, it wasn't stuck, spun over smoothly, sounded good. So I bought it, $250, and yeah, so we had ourselves a cheap 460 to go through. So pulled it apart, and I found it had had water in a couple cylinders. Not enough to seize it or anything, but it did cause some pitting. There's some water marks in a couple cylinders that looked like they would definitely hone out. Some just dark colored, but no pitting. But there's some pitting in one cylinder I'm pretty sure would not come out of it. And so let me get my drain pan and we'll continue on. Like I said, I was going to talk and work, and I need a drain pan. So anyway, so pulled it down, had some pitting in one cylinder. So I started pricing out. I was still trying to not tear this thing down. So I was like, well, if I spend the money and get it bored, it costs about $200 to get it bored, and then I would and I could get pistons for under $200. So I'm like, well, I could spend roughly $400, and that's the only extra expense I would have of boring it. And everything else, we're just ordering different size rings, but we could do that. And so that's the route I was going to take. But ran into another issue. That's why I needed a drain pan. Most of it went in the drain pan. Anyway, so let me get a start with the fresh tray. So I was doing some little work on this thing, and one of the things I was doing was on the trip, the AC did not blow well. And so what I did was I pulled the cover off the evaporator over there. And when I did that, I cleaned the evaporator and get some of these tools out. I cleaned the evaporator. Kind of need to pee now. Clean the evaporator, but I noticed behind the evaporator there was a hole, and you can see what I'm doing? Barely. There was a hole, and so, but the hole was not in the firewall. So that evaporator housing, bolts to the firewall, but it actually extends down past the firewall. And what So what I was trying to do, I couldn't pull the evaporator out all the way because of the lines, and I didn't want to open up the the system because it's holding pressure. I've got refrigerant in it. AC is blowing cold, so I'm trying to avoid taking the lines off the evaporator. So I'm like, well, can I get in from underneath? So I jacked the car up and put it on stands, and yes, I can get to it underneath to fix that hole. And I think that hole is, we're losing a lot of our blower, the air from the blower. Did I say that? The blower was not blowing well, and that's why I did this. I don't remember. But anyway, so yeah, that was our whole reason for, forgot something, opening it up, or jacking it up, was to look underneath. So I had it on jack stands. Well, when I went to let it down, took the jack stands out from under it, and I touched the jack to let it down. And as soon as I just touched the jack, I grabbed the handle, and as soon as I did, it shot backwards. The whole jack shot backwards, rolled backwards. And so I quickly turned the jack to let it down, because the whole car dropped some. As soon as it shot back, the car dropped some, and I was like, the jack's gonna hit something. So I tried to quickly let the pressure off the jack. Already had the stands out from under it. But it was too late, because what it did was it dented the oil pan in. And the reason it shot backwards was, I had it jacked up on the cross member, which is how I've always jacked this thing up. But after that road trip, that cross member is just covered in oil. And so what it did, I guess it was just super slippery. You can see on the cross member, I was all the way up under it. It wasn't like I was on the edge, the cross member, or whatever. You can see the jack. You can see the scratch marks where it slid. So, as you can see, my jack, there, that tab right in the center of your screen is where the jack was sitting, right there. And you can see a little indentation there. That's where the little pads of the jack are, and you can see the tracks of it sliding out. 3 of the little pads in the corners of your screen. You can see the 2 side ones, and then probably, I don't know if that was the front or back on the middle. And it shot this thing out. I can't believe it did it, but it did. What a mess. So, and since the front was jacked up and the back was not, the cross member was kind of like at an angle like this. It had jacked up pretty high. And so it kind of was like a ramp, I guess, a wedge. And it just did a wedge effect and shot that jack forward and onto the oil pan, and it crushed in part of the oil pan. Now, I've checked, I do still have oil pressure, but it's dented in pretty decent, enough that makes me concerned that if I drove this thing on the freeway, it might starve for oil, that pickup is probably right on the bottom of the oil pan right now, and that it would starve for oil at higher RPMs. So now I'm at the point, I don't want to drive this thing until I fix that oil pan. Well, if I'm gonna have to pull the oil pan off, I could jack the thing up and probably snake the oil pan out from under it. That cross member's in the way, but I could probably get it out, if I undid the motor mounts, jacked it up, and all that kind of stuff. But also probably need to check, I don't think these have a bolt-on. I think they're like a small block Chevy, where that oil pickup tube kind of just presses on there, and you have to get it positioned just right. So all that would be kind of, if it knocked that thing up when it did, and all that would be really difficult to do with the engine still in the car, to make sure that that's still at the right level. So I think I'm at the point, I don't want to drive it, so we're going to need to pull this engine anyway if we're going to rebuild an engine. So I think at this point, I'm not sure I'm going to use that other block. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and pull this one. Let's tear it down and see, you know, if we can get by with just honing this one. Like I said, this thing's got 76,000 miles and, or 70,000. It's got 70,000 miles on it. And there was no, it didn't look to be anywhere in the cylinders. So I think, you know, what I want to do is probably just hone this one, and we're gonna have to replace one piston that had some detonation, but I've got a whole set of pistons out of that other engine we could probably use. I'm gonna look and make sure the same part number, and if they are, if everything's all the same, we'll probably just use that whole set of pistons, or we might use one. We're gonna have to do some investigation to make sure everything's still the same, and if it's not, we may end up buying a piston. I found a new old stock piston that we could put on that cylinder, same exact piston. It's a Ford new old stock piston we could put on that cylinder, but if we got a whole engine with 8 pistons that are exactly the same as this one, then we'll just use those. But we'll check all that stuff first. So anyway, long story short, I think we're going to tear this thing down and see what it looks like. I've been gathering parts for the dove heads. That was the other thing, you know, I got these dove heads, but if we've already got blow by, we don't want to throw more compression at it, right? That's just going to make the blow by worse. If the rings can't seal already, then they definitely don't need more compression. So we're going to tear this down. At a minimum, we will end up honing and rings, bearings, all that kind of stuff on some engine. This one, or if we end up going with the other one, it's going to have to be bored. So we'll figure it out. But we're not going to know until we tear this one down, until we get this one out and tear it down. So I'm going to go ahead and, I guess, pull this off. And start undoing the radiator. And we will probably try to figure out a better way to mount this radiator, since this one does not fit correctly. We're gonna figure something out there, make it fit a little better. Thought about bolting another piece on here. I can't weld aluminum, so I'm not set up to do it. So we'll have to figure something out. But yeah, this is gonna be round 2 of kind of having the front of the engine off. But I think what we can do, we're going to pull the engine and transmission together. And yeah, and we'll end up with a rebuilt engine, or at least re-ring. Yeah, the thermostat's not open, so we're holding water right there. Might as well just take this hose completely off because it's going to be in the way. So what would y'all do? Would y'all keep with the original engine? Would y'all go with the other one and bore it? I think most people would probably agree sticking with the original engine is probably the better option. But you know, if you want to do it right, you would rebore this engine. I mean, we're not going for a Concorde restoration or something, so numbers matching is not a huge deal for me. But you know, this engine so far has served me well. I mean, it runs good. It just leaks oil and has blow by. So, you know, I'm definitely not opposed to keeping this one with it. But yeah, we're gonna need to do, like I said, something about the belts. It's just, I could not keep belts on this thing. So, we're gonna have to address that. But I've got another set of pulleys off that other engine. I don't know if they are gonna line up right, but we've got, I don't know. It's not the prettiest pulley here. It's not the worst. Same on the water pump. So I really don't know. Anyway, I think that's where I'm going to leave you all off. I'm going to go ahead and do everything I need to do to get this radiator out of here. But I'll give you all some updates. I've already pulled the power steering pump off. AC compressor, we're just going to lay it off to the side. There's no reason to unhook the lines from it. Like I said, we'll just lay it to the side. Almost did that with power steering, but this line right here is leaking anyway, and so was this one. So I've got all new lines for the power steering and power boost. That was one of the things I bought before I left, because I knew if I blew one of those lines, I'd be without power steering and power brakes, and so I didn't want that to happen. So I went ahead and just bought. They were cheap on Rock Auto, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get them anywhere locally if I needed them on the trip. I went ahead and just bought all of them. So I've got all of them, so we'll probably inspect them and replace them while the engine's out. That's going to be the easy time to do it, because they're packed down in there. So might as well undo them. Now I put my oil pan down there and drain the power steering fluid into it, so we didn't make too big of a mess. We got a little bit sitting right there, but most of it drained down and went into our pan. So yeah, let me get busy. Plan is pull the radiator, take the AC compressor off, undo throttle bracket, transmission kick down, hoses, heater hoses and fuel line, all that kind of stuff, and then cross member on the transmission, shift linkage, drive shaft, transmission cooler lines, all that stuff going to come off, and we'll pull the engine transmission together. We're going to take the hood off, and so I will give y'all some updates as we go along, but I'm just going to try to get some work done on this thing. I'm just pecking away at it a little at a time. Weekends and after work are really the only times I have to work on it, so I'm going to try to move quick on it, which means less videoing, because anybody that's videoed knows that it takes about 3 times longer doing something if you're trying to video and explain it than it does just doing it. So probably not going to video a whole lot of it, but I'll try to get y'all some updates. But that's what's going on. That's where we are on this project. I don't know if y'all are following along on this, if y'all find it interesting. Yeah, I'll maybe cover some of the engine build more in details if y'all are interested in that. That seems more interesting, so I can show y'all that. It'll be the first 460 I've ever built, not the first Ford engine, but the first 460. Never torn into a big block Ford before, but so that'll be interesting. Well, I guess technically I've already torn into the parts one we have, but anyway, that's going to be it. That's where we are on this. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment down below, hit the like button, and subscribe for more.